Every organization I've worked with has policies. They, of course, have tools, and most all of them have teams with dedicated resources and budgets. Very few of them can reliably prove that their governance program actually works, especially when it comes to AI. Not to an examiner, not to a board, and honestly, not to themselves. That's the void, and that's what this show is all about. I'm Mark Vanis, and I'm the founder of Void Vanguard, an AI governance and security architecture advisory firm. Before I started this firm, I spent the last 11 years building. I ended as the director of information security at a $3.5 billion financial institution, acquiring a bank charter and preparing for federal examiner oversight. I helped build the security and identity governance, PAM, and data protection programs, including the evidence architectures to support them from scratch. I defended them in front of examiners and auditors, including from firms like KPMG, Deloitte, RSM, and CLA. I learned in real time what separates a program that holds up from one that collapses under scrutiny. This podcast is called Into the Void, and it exists because there's a gap between what regulated organizations are being asked to do with AI and the governance frameworks that are available to do it safely, and the gap is widening. Organizations that don't start closing it now aren't going to fail because they moved too slowly, but rather they're going to fail because they didn't start building the governance architecture required to adopt it safely today. This show is for the people that are trying to close that gap. Boards, executives, CISOs, CROs, compliance and operations leaders at mid-market regulated institutions who are being asked to deploy AI responsibly, but don't have a clear framework for what responsibly actually means in practice. That's who I'm talking to. And if that's you, or you're just interested in the topic anyway, let's get into it. Most organizations treat governance like a tax, something that you pay so that you can operate. You write the policy, you check the box, and you move on. And then 6 months later, when an examiner is sitting across from you and asks you to demonstrate that the policy actually does what you say it will, the room gets very quiet. That quiet moment is a mechanism failure. It's not a governance failure. The policy existed and the intent was real. But nobody designed the system that connects the policy to the evidence. And nobody asked, how does this produce a defensible output? Most organizations don't have a governance problem, but rather a translation problem. They struggle to translate risk into action, action into evidence, or evidence into a narrative that holds up. The pieces exist, but only exactly as that, pieces. The disconnected pieces won't survive pressure. Those disconnected pieces will fail you when it matters the most. When the translations can occur and the architecture is well designed, governance is actually what lets you move faster. Because you've already answered the examiner's questions before they ever walk through the front door, you've built evidence into the mechanism itself, and the control produces the proof. The audit becomes a confirmation rather than a confrontation. It's not idealism, it's very possible. I've built it. I've seen what it looks like when organizations don't. Capability without catastrophe. That's the standard this firm is built around. Let me tell you what it means, because it's easy to hear it as a slogan, but at Void Vanguard, it's a design requirement. Capability is the ability to deploy AI tools inside of your organization and use them at scale in ways that create real business value. Whether that's faster underwriting or more efficient compliance reviews or better fraud detection, there are many use cases, and the upside is quite real, and others are already moving. Catastrophe is the other side of the equation. It's the material exam or audit finding, or it's the breach that traces back to an ungoverned AI model. It's the moment in a board meeting where someone asked who approved the deployment, and the answer is effectively no one who had the real authority to do so. The firms that navigate this transition well are not the ones that move slower, waiting for a framework to copy and paste. They're not the ones with more lawyers in the room or longer approval chains, but rather they're the ones that build a governance architecture before they really, truly need it. That way, as their organization's capability and understanding of AI matures, the framework is already there to contain it. It's deliberate, not cautious, and that's the distinction. Cautious organizations delay, and deliberate organizations design. Capability without catastrophe is a design target, not a risk posture. Something else I've observed in almost every environment I've worked in is organizations, or most organizations, have the right pieces. They have a risk appetite, stated or unstated. They've got a strategy. They've got controls. Evidence can be produced and reports are generated. All 5 things exist, but they're not designed to work together as a cohesive system. They exist only as artifacts, and it's a massive difference because artifacts don't connect themselves. Under pressure, the gaps between these artifacts show up as cracks in the foundation. Every episode of this show, every engagement I run, and every framework that Void Vanguard produces is organized around a 4-phase arc. I want to name it now so that we have a lens for everything that follows. Diagnosis. Before you can fix anything, you have to see it clearly. Not through the eyes of a vendor selling you a solution, and not through the lens of a compliance team trying to check a box. You need an honest read of where your program actually stands, what's working, what's decorative, and where there are liabilities waiting to surface. Expose. Diagnosis without honest exposure is just a report that sits on a shelf. Exposure means naming the gaps directly. Mechanism failures, evidence gaps, architectural debt. It means being willing to say that this control isn't actually controlling anything, that your policy isn't producing evidence, and that this process breaks down exactly when you need it the most. Architecture. This is where most governance conversations should spend far more time than they do. Architecture means designing the system, the mechanisms, the controls, the evidence loops, and the reporting structures so that compliance is a byproduct of operations and not a separate overlay. When governance is architected correctly, the system produces proof as it runs. Proof. This is the output. It's defensible evidence that survives examiner scrutiny, board-level questioning, and real-world failure scenarios. It's not documentation that says the right things, but rather it's evidence that demonstrates the program actually does what it claims to do. That's the arc, and you'll hear it in every episode. And it's the operating logic of both this show and Void Vanguard. So here's the thing I want you to walk away with from episode 1. The question is not whether your organization has an AI policy. Almost every organization I talk to has one. The question is whether that policy produces evidence. Does it connect to a mechanism? And does that mechanism generate a defensible output? Can you show an examiner right now that the thing this policy claims is happening is actually happening? If you can't answer that clearly, then you don't have a governance program. You have a document, and a document won't protect you when the question gets asked under pressure. So start there. Audit what you have. Not against best practices, but against evidence. What evidence should this control produce? And that's the diagnostic question that changes everything. Governance isn't just about having the right pieces, but rather being able to connect them end to end to withstand the pressure. No one is asking whether you implemented the controls. Rather, they're asking, can you prove clearly and completely that what you did manages the risk that you said it would? And if you can answer that cleanly, consistently, and without hesitation, that is governance. Everything else is just activity. This is Into the Void. I'm Mark Vanis, founder of Void Vanguard, and in the next episode, we'll talk about the governance gap that no one's actually measuring and why your examiner already knows it's there. If this landed for you at all, subscribe. Please feel free to share it with someone who's navigating the same gaps. If you're sitting on an AI governance challenge that you can't close internally, the link to start a conversation is in the show notes. 30 minutes, no pitch, just a read of where you stand. Capability without catastrophe. That is the standard.